Everyone. Here we are at CAWTAC meeting number 29 and our last meeting together. All good things must come to an end, right? So I'll say it at the beginning. I'm sure we'll say it again at the end, but thanks to all of you for the time and energy that you've put into this over the past 2 years. Yeah, just really appreciate each of you and the work that we've done together. Um, it's been a while since we've met. That was back in September. Hope you've enjoyed the last couple of weeks without contact meetings. Yeah, in September, the last time we met, we talked about Division 24. Prior to that, we had talked about Division 8 rules. Um, Today, we're going to start off with a review of your feedback. Maybe we can pull up the PowerPoint and the agenda, but we're going to start with reviewing, what we've heard from you in response to draft rules, and after and a little bit of the kind of key changes to the draft rules that have happened since we last met. And then for our last meeting here, we want to hear from all of you. So we're going to take a little time to hear from each person about the draft rules that they support and the ones that they maybe aren't as supportive of. So that's our plan for today. To get us started and help frame our discussion, Jenna is going to introduce our racial equity framework focus area.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you. So this being our last CowTech meeting, you'll notice that while we do have some focus areas highlighted here, I've also outlined all of the focus areas for our racial equity framework. And that's because this is our meeting where we are really considering all the draft rules holistically. And so I really wanted to make sure that we are ensuring that we are implementing all of the focus areas in these in the finalization of these rules. However, I did want to highlight a few that are especially pertinent to today's conversation as we are making final decisions and hearing from you all. Your comments in this final CalTech meeting. And so I've highlighted community engagement and empowerment, decision-making, and measuring and evaluating outcomes and continuous improvement. In terms of the key questions for consideration under these focus areas, who influenced the draft rules and how has both our rulemaking advisory committee and you all, the CowTAC, engaged with these draft rules for capacity and urbanization? I hope you all are able to see places where your feedback has influenced the draft rules, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we will also have space in this meeting to continue to hear from you all on your feedback before the rules are finalized. And so we want to hear from you all, especially those of you who maybe haven't shared as much in these meetings. So there will be dedicated space to do that, and we really encourage you all to speak up and voice your concerns or areas that you support, and making sure that this is an equitable decision-making process. The second question, thinking about the racial equity framework more broadly and all the focus areas and questions within them, as well as the racial equity questions that we've talked about in every single meeting over the course of this rulemaking. How well do the draft rules implement the racial equity framework? And so that's something that I encourage us all to think about today. And in addition to that, how, once these rules are finalized, how will we measure racial equity impact and effectiveness of this rulemaking and the capacity and urbanization rules over time? So that's just something that I wanted to highlight for today's conversation, and I hope you all we'll think about that as we continue on with our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for that context for today, Jenna. And I think we are going to just stay with you to start talking about some of the contact feedback that we've heard over the past.
Close, but I'm going to dive in and
okay.
pitch hit for Jenna on the key places where our work has influenced the rules. Thanks, Steve. And again, nice to see everyone. Maddie Phillips, Public Facilities Planner here within DLTV's Housing Division. It's a pleasure to see you all for this final time that we're all here together as an advisory committee. And again, you'll hear expressions of gratitude throughout our presentation and our time together, but it's particularly impressive to have this group continue with such vigilance to work through these issues with us. So thank you. We'd like to summarize, first of all, how in more simplified terms and boiled down to one slide in a presentation, some of the ways that your feedback has influenced the ways that our proposed rules present today. And Cotton and others will present a few other details about some of the changes we can show you between when you may have read the rules and now after we conclude this. First and foremost, we heard loud and clear that paper capacity is undesirable in the context of planning for good urban growth and growth management. And we did our best to address that through some of the work around buildable land inventory, its method, and then further around development ready land. So that buildable land methodology includes the land market supply factor. That's something novel that we haven't acknowledged in our time in the land use program in Oregon, that not all land within a city's urban growth boundary will develop in the 20-year planning horizon. And that we believe that that's going to have a really acute and positive impact on how cities are able to make decisions, or local jurisdictions are able to make decisions when they perform a buildable land inventory. Similarly, and to follow on with that, the subset of land that is ready for development within a shorter near-term planning horizon, that 8 or 6 year planning horizon for housing production strategy work, to recognize that development ready land is in fact the opposite of paper capacity. It's ready and available, and cities can support its use in production of needed housing. Secondly, we heard from you all that you'd really like to see flexibility in how land is considered, especially constrained land, and consider also land in local context. A lot of us come to our work knowing the history and some of the important nuances to certain areas of our communities. That doesn't always come through in rule, and there's a desire to see flexibility in how rules are applied to recognize those unique circumstances. There's a slew, hopefully, of guidance that will follow these rules in our coming weeks, months, years to follow. And we hope that guidance will help cities estimate buildable land more accurately. Will also allow and consider the impact of hazards and where they are geographically in our communities, as to how those have either influence or change the way that we make decisions about growth. There are some safe harbors included related to ways that cities can find certainty where there was not certainty before in that level of flexibility. And we're also hoping that some modifications that have been made around land UGB swapping of land is more clear, certain, and also at the same time flexible, to understand that each swap is its own unique circumstance and therefore has some contextual nuance to it. In terms of providing we heard from you all that you wanted greater legal certainty, and I already touched on a couple places where that might have come through in safe harbors or other clarifications, but in specific, safe harbors for inventorying land, considering land use efficiency measures and how much is enough in that context, further thinking about the prioritization of neighborhood serving commercial opportunities when bringing in residential land was an area where legal certainty was expressed, desire for that was expressed, and we feel that the rules as presented respond to that. Similarly, defining land use efficiency measures, partial vacancy, and the ways that those tools could be used by local governments was a high level focus for us around the area, or the concern around legal certainty. Next, we heard that accounting for infrastructure challenges in both expansions and urban reserve areas, past work, surfacing there. UGB expansions and urban reserve areas was an area of concern and perhaps lacked clarity. We believe that the rules as presented now help jurisdictions determine whether land truly is impracticable to serve, with some definition around that term and a little bit more certainty that using a certain factor will guarantee support, or at least a clear path for jurisdictions to move forward in UGB work, as well as in the context of establishing urban reserves. Next, we also heard that there was interest in really clarifying what the legislature meant by development readiness. The definition provided in 197A has terminology in it that had perhaps some gray areas, or some areas that weren't very clearly defined. And we responded to that concern by providing definitions to a lot of the elements, particularly readily served, near term, and a number of other criteria that help a city effectuate a development ready land inventory without the concern or likelihood that their interpretation of statute was either incorrect or could be challenged. And then finally, the big picture: communities want to make the best use of land within their urban growth boundaries. We heard that loud and clear from you all, especially the practitioners in the room, and we really appreciate that perspective because we share it. We know that there's a lot of weight on production out of the results of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, and a desire to facilitate development readiness. We hope that the rules as presented and perhaps amended along the way will allow folks in local government positions doing this work to increase the availability of development ready land, and also provide some clarity on how cities approach and effectuate land use efficiency measures. So that's to say, we think we heard you loud and clear. We know you're trying to help your communities grow in meaningful ways, your and other communities throughout the state. We also have heard that there are a variety of ways you've gotten hung up and mired in all kinds of legal challenge and work that maybe could have been streamlined, or we hope will be streamlined by the way that the rules are crafted now. And we value your feedback and perspective on how we move through this next phase, which is fine-tuning and perfecting each of the pieces. And then more importantly, or most importantly, how it gets used in the field, how it's implemented. We're hopeful that the results of our work will be fruitful, and your growth management work as practitioners is smoother and has more predictability in some respects. So thank you for sharing these pretty critical, I guess we've lumped a lot of your comments into big themes, and we hope that the responses, the ways that the rules respond to them, are both meaningful and produce the outcomes that were desired. I'll turn it back to you, Steve. Thanks very much for leading us through this next section.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. I think Karin is going to speak to a slide or two before we begin our discussion.
Let's pause here for a second. So I think the last time we got feedback from you all before the official public comment period was in September. So thank you, everyone, who really hurriedly put together some comments and some suggestions and wrote to us in advance of the rules being published. So we thought we'd come highlight, based on that comment that we received through August, September, and even though, the rush to get comments to us a couple weeks, the last couple weeks in September, and highlight for you what we did with that in regards to what you see published today. So the draft proposed rules are published and noticed with the Secretary of State, and I'll go through a handful of items that we just wanted to highlight that are new. And we can talk about those today, or we can talk about anything outside of these revisions. So in our next slide, I'll start with the housing capacity analysis. And what we have new, since you guys might have seen it pre-publication or pre-Secretary of State notice, just a reminder that Division 7 is repealed entirely, but Division 8 has been structured to apply to all jurisdictions. So we'll include Metro within Division 8, henceforth, moving on. Within Division 8, we've added some new provisions for discounting capacity. I know here in this group, we've talked a lot about land market supply factors. We went ahead and added under Rule 100, which is your housing capacity rule. There's some new paragraphs 7, 8, and 9, just referring you back to the statutes that kind of govern your capacity work. So we make that clear connection there in paragraph 7. And then paragraph 8, some options for parcel discounting over time with each cycle of a housing capacity analysis. And then paragraph 9, should you not choose the optional path in 8, then there's a requirement for discounting parcel capacity at a parcel level. So that's fairly new. I think that's about it as far as Division 8 capacity. Everything else is stuff we've talked about at least a couple times, if not more, over the last 18 months. So I'll move on to Goal 14 work, our next slide here, and some key provisions that we've added as we took in feedback from a variety of interested parties and TAC members and RAC members. So looking at how we exclude land from a study area, and this is in Division 24, Rule 65, when you're looking at a comparative analysis of cost per unit to provide public services, we're looking at that cost per unit calculation to be a comparison of, does one sub area exceed 4 times the median cost per housing unit, comparing all sub areas. So that was a new clarification and refinement there. And then looking at prioritizing resource lands, or I'm sorry, prioritizing the land prioritization in consideration to be included into a UGB, and looking at that prioritization from resource to non-resource lands. We primarily took from Division 24, what is the language, how we do that land prioritization work, and how much of that can we bring in Division 21 and really try to mirror that language and have it as similar as possible. So you'll see that in Rule 67, paragraph 2, and then Division 21, Rule 30, and that'll be paragraph 4. And then UGB exchanges. So we talked about this a lot, how land gets swapped out. Just a reminder that for cities that are swapping out land, whatever residential designation you're swapping out, if you're swapping out high density land or mid density or even low density, you're always balancing that I haven't adopted an acknowledged housing capacity analysis. So my findings have to support that housing capacity analysis that's already previously been adopted and has been acknowledged by DLCD. So I have to show that I'm not creating a deficit in any type of housing need. So if I have housing need that's met with my current UGB for low density residential or high density residential, whatever I swap out and whatever I swap in can't create a deficit. But if I have a surplus of low density and I want to swap that out, the only requirement is whatever you swap in must be equivalent to or at a higher density. And just noting that we've put a fine point on what substantially equivalent means. We talked about that. It's 10%. So that stays. So just a bit of clarification. We've had a little bit of confusion around that. So thought I would point those out for you all. And then moving on to urban reserve areas. So we'll specifically look at Division 21. And I think, let me think about where, I think it is Rule 30, paragraph 3 is where you'll find this. And so within statute, there are some consideration factors. These factors within statute don't have criteria to go along with each factor, but they are sort of a supplemental guide for land to be brought into an urban reserve area. And so you'll see that right along with the land prioritization hierarchy that we're very familiar in using and has more specific pathway and criteria. You now have a supplemental consideration factors when you're looking at land to bring into an urban reserve area. And so, Steve, I'm going to transition us because we're going to spend the bulk of the meeting hearing from you all. And we thought that maybe what you most wanted to share with us as we are revising the rules, because they are draft proposed rules that have been published. And as we do our final revisions, you might be thinking, okay, I'm okay with this. This is fine. I can live with it. This is a concern. I would really like to see this readdressed. There's something specific that I think could improve the rule or make it better. But then in my back pocket, I was like, well, maybe there's a third thing. If there's something that you feel really strongly you've advocated for, you championed, or just something that you really highly support, maybe let us know that as well. Like, this is a rule that I really wanted to see. I'm glad it's finally in there. Maybe it's great the way it is, or maybe you could tweak it a little bit here and there. So I added another category, but Steve, let me know how you want to do this as we transition to letting our tech members share.
Perfect. Thank you for the context setting, Cotton. In the interest of time, excuse me, we're going to ask for you to, as it says on the slide here, to speak to one draft rule you support and one you would like to see changed, of course, with the category or the additional category that Cotton just mentioned about one that you would champion. I am just going to bounce around the room. If we get through everyone giving their, I guess, their one support and one do not support, and we have more time, maybe we'll loop back if people have other thoughts they want to share, or maybe we'll identify some areas that we want to dive into a little bit deeper, but the priority is to make sure that everyone gets a chance to speak. So I think we can take the slide down. Perfect. And I'm going to bounce around the room, not picking on anyone, but Damien, you're always prepared. Do you mind starting us off?
Sure, happy to.
Thank you.
So with respect to the rule I wanted to support, I wanted to mention the new 3 under OAR 660 021 0030. And this is incorporating, I wrote this down correctly and I can read it without my readers, ORS 197A 2456, which I think is important to not just the reader, but to the jurisdictions using this rule to understand that these are the most important things to think about when you're looking at an urban reserve in terms of planning for future urbanization of an area. And that really should help, I think, frame the analysis and thinking behind designating urban reserves. In terms of anything that's really, I don't have anything that I strongly oppose. We've already provided comments to the record, but under 660 024 0065 8D, if I've got that citation correct, this is a crack at trying to look at impracticability to serve when looking at cost per unit calculations exceeding 4 times the median cost per unit of all subareas. And I myself don't have a better number, whether that should be 5 times or 2.5 times, but this is one where I'd recommend collecting some data, but also, crafting a an alternative if a local government can say, you know, we've done our work, and really what we're seeing is there's a difference between areas that are practicable to serve and those that are impracticable, but that measurement of impracticability is 3.25 times. And on this note, I think this is a good topic that I'd request the department include in technical guidance for using the rules, so that, you know, a city understands here's how you calculate cost per unit for all your sub areas, so that it's going to be clear to the reader when they're evaluating our work.
Thanks, Damien. Would you mind, just because not everyone has all the rules in front of them, you explained the second one really well. The first one, could you just touch on, I mean, you said it was about urban reserves, but what aspect of the urban reserves that section referred to?
And I can help with that, Steve. It
Okay.
was the slide that I had up. It's can I share my screen? Damien was speaking specifically to what I just covered. It's the consideration factors
Okay.
from 2, 4, 5, 6. But
Right.
consideration factors from statute.
Thank you.
Yep,
Okay.
no worries.
Great. Thank you, Damien. Good.
What Karen said. Thank you.
Yeah, good way to start us off.
And you got the rule, which I missed in my slides. So between the two of us, Damien, we'll figure this out.
All right. Next up, Al. Could you share your support and your not support with us, please?
Well, I'll try to stay within the confines, Steve, but
I appreciate
I
that.
guess, yeah, I mean, I have a long list. I submitted a lot of written comments. I appreciate the 2-on-2 or 1-on-1 we had last week. That was helpful. I'm not happy about the fact that there's been really no response to a lot of the issues that I have raised. But I would say that on the plus side, I like what's been happening on the development ready side. Those rules in general, I'm not going to call out a specific one. I've got a long list of things that I think are a problem. I think we have basically been wandering around in the weeds without dealing with the forest, and that this entire rulemaking process is headed for a train wreck. That's all I have to say.
All right. Thanks, Al. Next, let's go to Corey.
Thanks. I'm trying to collect my thoughts as well. I submitted comments on the record that I think have more detail. But I also agree that I think a lot of the provisions around the development ready lands part of this rulemaking has been great. The provisions aimed at the kind of paper capacity issue that we discussed as a group. I think many of those are really strong. I have concerns around 8D, which is the one that Damien just flagged. I'm not sure that one's quite ready. It seems like there's a lot of defining and more data needed to really make that something that I would support staying in the rule. So that will be the one I flag as probably in the most need of attention. But there are a few other adjustments that I've flagged as critical in my written comment. Thanks.
Great. And yeah, thanks everyone for submitting written comments as well. And towards the end of the meeting, we'll kind of go over the comment, just the adoption process and the opportunities to comment going forward. Okay. Alyssa, can you share with us your thoughts on draft rules?
I knew you were going to call on me next. I don't know how, but it's because I don't have my thoughts all organized yet. So far, I just would want to. It's interesting, right? There's a range of comments that have already gone before, and some of them are supportive, and some of them are concerned. And I guess I would characterize my comments in agreement with both the supportive comments and the comments of concern. And so I can, if you give me a little bit more time, I can pull out the specificity. But in general, I think the people before me have done a pretty good job of sort of laying out, you know, where we've dug in and where we sort of, I really appreciate what Al said, like we are in the weeds and we're missing the forest. And I think we need to do both. And so that's where I'm at right now, but you can come back to me later.
All right, Alyssa, I'll hold you to that. We'll loop back to you. Alexandra, would you mind going next, please?
I think I really liked what Alyssa ended with, which is we, are kind of missing the point to some extent. I think, overall, there are parts that I certainly like. I think we're heading in the right direction on urban reserves. Still don't love the precedent set by the 80%. I don't think it's needed. And I think that kind of clarity goes kind of against where we're headed with kind of the rest of urban reserves. I'll submit comments on the record on that one and all of the rest of the things that I have feelings with. But I think, when I look big picture at how this rulemaking process is going, both the cowtack and the hog and every other possible farm animal we can get in the room here, I think we're kind of missing the forest for the trees and kind of missing the original intent of OHNA, which was to lessen analytical burden, provide clarity and legal surety for cities and things like that. And I don't, even if I may, find certain pieces that I don't object to, I think we've missed that. We've made a lot of analytical burden for cities. We've added a lot of new things. We've added a lot. And so, yeah.
Okay.
Bless your heart.
All right. Cassara, would you mind?
I knew I was going to be next. I had the, I was right on
You all
you.
can read my mind.
I
I don't
know.
understand.
That's what 29 meetings will do. Out of the whole, I'm really excited because I think that infrastructure has really become such a, top consideration in planning for urban reserve areas and for UGB expansion. So I don't have a specific, rule to cite, but, the development ready lands for sure. And providing some options on what cities and counties can consider in determining what, may be difficult to serve. Have some questions. Is it 4 times the cost? Is that the right threshold? And then likewise, this is not a hill I'm willing to die on by any means, but looking at Division 24, I love the idea that, 67, Section 10, about public facilities planning for newly added UGB areas. Just another question mark. I think cities should plan for that. It's the 5-year requirement. Are they going to have resources? So maybe some of that can be addressed through technical assistance from the state.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Derek.
Yeah, I guess what I would share is I appreciate the work that you guys have done, particularly with respect to the UGB adjustments, Division 24-0070. It addresses a specific concern we've had and some challenges we've had here locally. I do have some questions about a couple of provisions that are in there, some of the changes that I can follow up offline on, but do appreciate the effort specifically with respect to those administrative rule provisions.
All right. Thank you, Derek. Next up, Brock.
Good part. 65 for B, big D, with the other hazards. Much better way to write it than where we started. Beyond that, I agree with Al and Alexandra. We are headed for a train wreck. We've created a lot of burden for cities. There's a lot of things that need to come out and a lot of other things that need to go in. And I did find a 2022 study on SDCs on average for a single family. It's about $15,000 based on that 2022 study. So 4 times that would be adding $45,000 in cost per unit. So I think that's a little bit high. Seems like that's, 10% of a median home cost. Actually, it's only about 9%. So yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Brock. Let's see here. Heather, would you mind going next, please? I did say Heather. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Um, yeah, so I think I'm gonna cheat a little bit and not name a name a specific. The new provisions related to capacity. So the market factor adjustment for capacity, I think, is really helpful. And the addition of when we're doing capacity analysis, the safe harbor for large cities for at least some of the partially vacant land types. So I think that those are really helpful and appreciate those. I do want to kind of echo the, wishing that we could reduce the analytical complexity that overall I think the rules will require. And one of those, I think some of those areas would be cleaned up with more or addressed with some more safe harbors, optional safe harbors, not necessarily the rebuttable presumptions. And then some of the areas where, and I brought this up in some recent meetings, the zone to allow definition and how that's used throughout the rules. I know, I understand. I think staff's going to look at that some more, but I think that there's just some areas like that where I think that whether or not it was intended, I think that the layers of complexity and additional analysis that's going to be required on top of what we were already doing is going to make this pretty complicated and difficult to administer in a timely fashion. So just some, overall concern about that.
Thank you, Heather. All right. Just trying to make sure everyone is still in the room. Joy, are you in the room? I know they were here at the beginning, but now I'm not seeing Joy. Yes, no, no. Okay. Martha, would you mind going next?
Sure. I didn't really prepare anything. I think that I'm a little surprised at myself saying this, but I think one of the things that I ended up really supporting, even though it came in last minute, was getting rid of Division 7, which is surprising to me. But I like the idea of all of the rules being together in Division 8. It has been confusing in the past what applied where. And so in terms of sort of consolidating and making things theoretically easier, I think that was a good call. I still think there are a number of things in Division 8 that are confusing. And I actually am not I like the idea of development ready lands. And I think I like the idea of what it's getting at, but I think that the way it's set up right now is confusing and complex, and it does add a lot of analytical burden on a jurisdiction that has to try to wade through that. And I will do my best to provide comments and my own thoughts on how maybe to make that better, because I do support the idea. I just am not sure that it's really gotten there yet. And then Divisions 21 and 24, I mean, I have a few little nitpicky things to say about them, but I think generally the direction that they're going is good. And I think that most of the changes that were made, certainly the ability to sort of consider serviceability, I definitely support those.
Thank you, Martha.
Mm-hmm.
Up next, Sam, would you mind sharing? We're going around. I know you came in just a little bit late. One policy or rule change that you support, and one that maybe you don't support. If you have any strong feelings about the rule changes, the draft rules.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the setup there. I was gonna Yeah, so I think there's one piece that we were focused on pretty early, and that was in Division 8 around the proportion or the safe harbor that we could include from redevelopment in terms of our capacity, and I think that was the 20%. There's still questions in my mind around like what the analytical requirements will be in there, but I understand that we're going to be delving into that a little bit with the guidance perhaps that comes later. So I like that that's been simplified. I think most of my focus in reading this has been on the development ready lands piece, and I agree with, I think it was Martha and someone else who was just talking about that. The analytical burden seems pretty high. There's the complexity is up there. I do like how it's now seems to be more aligned with the sort of capacity analysis at large. So rather than an independent analysis altogether. But I do have concerns around what we will be required to show in terms of those sort of subcategories of development ready land, and the complexities that's going to go into that. So a little bit of a TBD.
Great, thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Let's see here. Once again, just making sure everyone's in the room. Ken, would you mind sharing thoughts on draft rules?
Yeah, I can. I don't have anything specific. A lot of folks have covered some of the stuff that I was already thinking about. The development ready land and near term kind of definitions. Just to, I guess, as a disclaimer, maybe to remind folks, I don't come from a planning background. I come from an engineering and an infrastructure background. So a lot of this stuff, I defer to you folks as the experts. But from an infrastructure perspective and development ready land, I'm still concerned, and I shared some information early on when we were covering that about the administrative burden to kind of calculate what we have to do now that's being looked at, and whether or not it will get us to something that is actually development ready. So I'd done, an analysis early on about looking at the parameters that were proposed. And then I looked back and said, hey, if we had applied those, 10, 15 years ago, would they actually have developed? And I didn't find that to be the case here. So I'm a little concerned about that. And again, I'm speaking personally from this, but I feel like I'm on the side of most of the folks in the room that were kind of administrators of the code, except maybe Brock and a couple of others that might be representing folks that will be users of the code. And so some of the things that Brock has been saying over this period really resonate with me. I'm trying to kind of focus at it from a user perspective as opposed to an administrator perspective. So.
Great, thank you, Ken.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Mary Kyle, would you go next, please?
Sure, thank you. I like the work on the development, or excuse me, the buildable lands inventory, the land use efficiency measures, partially vacant land safe harbors, lots of other safe harbors and discounts that are built in. And I like the development ready lands aspect with one potential concern, although I'm really interested in Martha's comments about how to make it work better, because we think that's a really powerful tool. That's a great addition to how cities plan for residential development. So if there's ways to make that actually work better, I think that'd be great. Our one comment on the development ready lands is there's, as was highlighted in the slides earlier by the staff, that if some lands considered development ready have not developed within a particular time period, then they're automatically discounted by a third each cycle or 50% each cycle. And that seems to me to be too general. Obviously, these were lands that a city found to be development ready within their 20-year supply. They were found to be development ready over the next 6 to 8 year period. So I prefer that before that automatic discount, that there be a requirement to figure out, well, why didn't they develop, and are there tools that the state or others can bring to help those develop? It just seems too broad brush and too soon in the analysis. And then on the way in the study areas for lands to include in an urban growth boundary, we find the notion that any city can estimate the infrastructure costs of land over a 20-year period beyond its, as they're planning beyond their current 20-year UGB for the next cycle, and figure out which lands are 2 times more expensive, 4 times more expensive, 10 times more expensive to develop, is really not based in reality. I've been involved in a lot of UGB amendments, and I can promise that every single one has grossly underestimated the cost of infrastructure for the UGB expansion, including on very flat farmland. So that just seems to me to be unrealistic. Also, this is about which lands to study for an urban growth boundary expansion. It's not about which lands to bring in. So we think it's premature to make that calculation at the studying areas stage. And it also ignores the other reasons for which land is brought into an urban growth boundary. It's not just about residential development. It's about all kinds of development. It's also about governance, need to make health hazard annexations or avoid in the future making a health hazard annexation for governance, for a variety of reasons that aren't necessarily related to yield of housing. So that just seems too focused and too unrealistic at the study area stage. Might be something to bring in later, to bring that idea in later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mary Kyle. Ted, could you go next, please?
Sure. It may sound like a cop-out, but I think sometimes exercising discretion in what you do not put in the rules is good. And I saw that happen with our discussion about how to estimate redevelopment potential. I think it's, we all sort of felt that jurisdictions around the state have different economic conditions that influence redevelopment potential. We all have different technical capacity to do that kind of work. So I think there was a good decision there to not get too prescriptive in how to do that work. General concern, and this, I think this isn't necessarily about this rulemaking, it's about more broadly the OHNA legislation and what it's required of all of us. It feels like we've constructed a very complex system, and I think there's just a risk of that comes with that complexity. And again, you all are doing what you've been asked to do in this rulemaking. A lot of this comes from the legislature, but I think it's an enormously complex system now with lots of analysis. My more specific concern related to this rulemaking is around UGB exchanges. I found the original notion of a UGB exchange to be kind of simple and elegant in that simplicity. You swap buildable land for buildable land. We're trying to accomplish something else by removing constrained land. And I think there are some detailed issues that come up as a consequence where I don't think we could use an exchange anymore, speaking from Metro's perspective, because I find it too confusing how it all works together, and there are some contradictory aspects to the draft rules.
Thank you, Ted. And now the real reason, Alyssa, I'm sure you just wanted to go last. That was your whole ploy, so you get your wish.
I just would like to say it's great to be on a committee with such smart, thoughtful colleagues who are doing like the Lord's work of urban planning here, and that includes everybody at DLCD as well as everyone else. So it was just great to hear everyone's comments. And the only thing, Steve, I wonder if you were waiting for me to get to this, which is the part that I'm glad that we did move forward on, and I do think represents forward progress in the conversation, is around the paper capacity question. And I think that we have chipped away at it and learned more about it and figured out new ways to analyze it. And I think we're at a good place to see if we can make progress on that question. And so to me, that's one thing I think that I did want to call out as think it's heading in the right direction, and we'll just have to see if how it works under the new paradigm and if it needs more work after that. So there you go.
Great. Thanks, Alyssa. I think that's everyone. If it isn't, let me know. I think we're hearing some consensus of concern about complexity. I think some complexity of the rule changes. I'm wondering if Cotton or Maddie or Jenna, if there's anything you heard that you want to dive into any deeper or ask for clarification. So I'm going to pause and see before moving on in a different direction. I want to see if you all have any specific questions you'd like to ask.
That unfair task of like, what is your favorite or least favorite provisions? Like, who's your favorite pet or your favorite child or your least favorite pet or least favorite child? It's just, so I don't want to pick anyone out. I mean, I have my own personal that I'm just very curious about. I'll turn it over just in case anybody else. Is there any burning questions you guys, Maddie or Jenna, have from what you've heard? Should I kick us off?
If I also I can ask a general question, Conan, if you
yeah, I feel like mine are very specific in the weeds from what I've heard. Let's start generally and then maybe I'll delve down.
Okay. I'll start generally. I think I heard the general concerns about complexity, and I think a few people mentioned the development ready lands piece in particular, although people also were very supportive of the development ready lands piece. So I guess I have two questions and people can maybe jump in on either one. One is if you could change something about the development ready lands analysis, what would it be to make it less burdensome? The other thing is, are there other specific provisions that you think are particularly burdensome and could be revised to still meet the objective, but maybe require less analysis or less burden on the parts of jurisdictions. So either some thoughts on specifically development ready lands or thoughts on other provisions that could be streamlined or if that's the right word. Sam, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the one thing that pops out to me is, or one of the things, first thing that popped out to me was like number two under section 180, where the city will be required to represent what that development ready land capacity is in those three categories, one being readily served, one being near term, and one being only being able to meet minimum density. I guess that in essence, I don't really understand the rationale for having to break those three things out, nor do I understand how, even if you really want to get to achieving minimal density, readily served versus near term, to me, I mean, is there really that much of a discernible difference there? And it seems to be more like splitting hairs. So I guess that's one piece where I think there would be an immediate improvement in simplifying that.
Great. Thanks for that recommendation. Appreciate it. Martha.
I agree.
Oh,
no, I absolutely agree. And I actually think this idea of, especially under sub 2 there, C, being required to try to identify on a site-by-site basis if land can achieve a minimum density is an extraordinarily hard analysis, particularly for a large jurisdiction. And I don't know that it's necessary. I mean, it's still development ready. It may still be development ready. And I think it comes out in this idea where you have to identify some sort of capacity. You're going to have to kind of estimate general capacity anyway. But yeah, I agree. I don't think that having to show each of those three categories I'm not sure how useful all of that is. And I know it's going to be a lot of work. That was one of my issues with development ready lands. And I mean, that was the big one, right? And again, I like the like this idea of being able to try to figure out what is the most likely to develop. But I also think we're trying to balance something that's realistic and doable with providing too many requirements that are just going to be difficult and add time and not add a lot of value.
Thank you, Martha. Brock.
Yeah, and this was one that was flagged in the earlier discussion. The 80% piece for the urban reserve rule, subsection 2 and rule 20, division 21, rule 60. It just needs to go. And Ted, this is particularly important for Metro because the Stafford area urban reserve, as I understand it, is a little over 6,000 acres. And if I'm remembering correctly, the total urban reserve for Metro is about 29,000. That Stafford Triangle is more than 20% of that entire area. And there's an intergovernmental agreement between multiple cities not to bring that land in. I don't know how you get around that. You could bring in the rest of your urban reserves, but you still won't be able to bring in land from any newly designated urban reserve areas until at least a portion of that is brought in and you can reach that 80% threshold. That's a real problem. We flagged this for months. We flagged the urban reserve rule for months, and that still has problems. I am concerned by the way that it seems that everything that we're doing is still just a back channel way to support goal 3, even if that means that happening at the expense of goal 10 and goal 14.
Brock, do you have a I mean, you said it just has to go. I mean, there is an objective there of trying to not just kind of skip over lands and skip over like the same lands again and again. Do you have thoughts on how that might be addressed in a different way?
Yeah, you could take it out. You could create a process for how to take it out of the urban reserve, and you can make that easy to do. But that's not what's being pursued here. What's being pursued is some sort of certainty, right, about when those lands are going to be brought in. Well, everybody in the Stafford Triangle, they have certainty that it will never be brought in. Not in my lifetime, not in anyone on this call's lifetime. There's a lot of things that could be done, and there's a lot of rules that are like this, where there are very much more obvious solutions than what's written on paper. They just haven't been pursued.
Thanks, Brock. Al.
Thank you, Steve. I just wanted to second what Brock had to say and apply that also to the idea of a 20% increment on the LUEM density requirements. You know, a 20% gain, you know, and you compound that over time. That's the kind of thing that you, if you're a Lake Oswego Ponzi scheme guy, that's the kind of numbers you put out for that kind of return you're going to get on your investment. It completely ignores the whole concept of the law of diminishing returns. So the idea we're trying to, you know, stuff more people, you know, into a very small part of Oregon. It's just it's almost obscene, I think, to do that. So I just am very, very concerned. I want to go back to a comment someone made that we're leaving the users out. You know, Brock and the people he represents, their users. The other users I haven't seen here are the people who are going to live in these houses or who are not going to live in the houses that don't get built.
Thanks, Al. Mary Kyle.
Well, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think the LUM 20% is a safe harbor that doesn't have to be used. Am I right about that, staff? And then also, I'm not sure the relevance of the 80% to Metro and the urban reserve, because Metro has its own restrictions on the ability on how much of the urban reserve one has to use before you add additional urban reserves. So I'm not sure that that's relevant to Stafford, but I defer to Ted on that. And I think the LUM thing is a safe harbor.
I don't want to get too much into a back and
well,
forth.
I just mean, I think overall there's things that are safe harbors that throughout the whole OHNA sometimes are perceived to be requirements, but they're not. So I just think that's an important distinction kind of overall to make. Thanks.
Brock, maybe be brief, and then I want to loop back to DLCD staff to see if they have other things they want to dive into.
Yeah, and Mary Kyle, this is a small change that we didn't notice initially either, but it's not that they can't expand the urban reserve until they brought in 80%. They can still expand the urban reserve. They can't bring any new land in from urban reserve V2 until they've brought in 80% of
Right.
reserve V1.
I got it.
That is a problem for Metro.
Thanks, bro.
I'll leave it at that.
Karin, Maddie, Jenna, looping back to the three of you to see. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but I just thought we could dive down that road a little bit and learn more about what complexities people or burdens people are most concerned about. So thanks everyone for commenting on that. Maddie?
I can maybe direct us into the conversation about development ready land and the categories. I guess we started that work a long time ago, and I would not be surprised if a lot of water has passed under the bridge since we've talked about the reason behind the categories and how they landed the way they are. So just to bring it back to the user perspective of what's the purpose of development ready land is to determine what land within a city's city limits, presumably save those counties that are doing work for their unincorporated lands. So forgive my overgeneralization, but land within city limits that is served. So it's an action that right now a user has to go through in order to determine. So they find vacant land or they find land that's available, and they pursue that individual lot by lot or potentially in groups of lots to a city, and you go through a verification process about the availability of utilities. I think that puts a lot of burden on the applicant. And I think there's some general perspective that that level of burden isn't producing housing units at the level of productivity we're hoping for. So to that end, it does, the legislature did give us a direction to require more analysis. So that was perhaps an area that we didn't have a lot of wiggle room to work with. But if we think about what happens in that, perhaps that first cycle is really challenging, because we have to now work with utility districts and we have to work with all of our partners to determine what lands are served, what land is ready within some reasonable test, which I think we've determined in the rules that are present. But then what are the things that, what level of confidence do we have in that first tier? So like we know these are served, but what about the level of confidence that we can have in the second tier, which are not those lands that are served right now, but they're promised to be served. So meaning they're financially committed to be served in the planning horizon. And those are perhaps like where the cities and managers, local jurisdictions that are going to do a development ready land inventory are really going to have to dig in to understand like the level of confidence in that second tier of identified parcels, because they're facilities that aren't in the ground yet. And I guess the city or jurisdiction is going to have a reasonable level of confidence. And I think that's the legislative intent, is to like find out what level of confidence does a jurisdiction have in the likelihood of that utility being available in the planning period, in a short near-term planning period. And then you all came back to us and said, well, that might not be enough, because what if we find out that there are areas that are underserved? They're zoned and planned for certain capacity, but the utilities aren't there and they're not going to be there. The only thing you're going to be able to do is put a single unit on this lot, or even though it's zoned for 20. And I think there's like a user perspective there, that though the burden of analysis is significant, there's like an incredible user benefit to the outcome of that work, that you're putting something on a map and showing a level of confidence as a jurisdiction for certain property. And I guess I want to bring it back to that part of development ready land, in understanding if we're trying to balance between the user perspective, which is like, let's analyze all of it and find out what's ready, versus let's keep status quo, which is not to analyze any of it and put that analytical burden on the applicant. Have we landed in the middle somewhere with this proposal, and potentially could there be some benefit in cycle 2 or cycle 3 where that analytical burden is diminishing over time? I guess just to ask the question of this group before before we throw all the categories out.
Yeah. Thanks, Maddie. And people can jump in on that. I want to go to Beth first.
If I could make an observation based on having done this for a really long time, and having to try to interpret things like the old 197, 296, there's an awful lot of uncertainty that I think is going to be clarified um, uh, sooner through guidance over the years with different cities and consultants trying to operationalize these rules and seeing what works and what doesn't. And then discussions back and forth with the LCD about what works and doesn't. And what I hope to see is goal 10 stayed really static for most of the last in years, more than 20. I'm hoping to see iteration on some of these rules as we find out what really doesn't work, and what could be done better. And I'll say that I've done this kind of work in other states where you have different restrictions than you have here in Oregon. And there's still some of these kind of problems. There's still uncertainty. Everybody looks for a lot of certainty. Um, and so while I agree with some of what I've heard, some of this is just plain constrained within the statutes in a lot of different ways. And whatever we do in some of these areas, is 80% the right number, is 4 times the right number, that kind of thing. I think well, we'll find out whether they're the right numbers, and perhaps we'll have an opportunity to bring back some better information about this. Because if you think about the amount of time that DLCD had to do these rules, it's not enough time to do some of these studies. I think Brock was mentioning an SDC study that I suspect was one that we did back a few years ago, and we had a lot of time just to do that study. And to answer some of these questions. Is just going to take a more concentrated look at some of these things. So that's not to discount any of the concerns that I've heard. I hold some concerns myself. But that's to say, I think we're just gonna, whatever we do, we're gonna have to figure out how to work through them. Because whatever we do, there's going to be these kind of concerns.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks for that perspective. Before we go to you, Karin, just wanted a side note. A couple people messaged me that Metro is not Metro rules for Metro are in Division 27. So kind of what we were talking about in terms of urban and rural reserves doesn't apply to them directly. But Karin, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make I don't want to go back and forth, but I just want to make a comment for cities that aren't in Metro and have an urban reserve. You still have a provision, I think 210070. It already is a rule. You can adjust your urban reserve. There are amendments to urban reserves. Anyway, just because you put your land in an urban reserve doesn't mean it has to be there static forever. For other cities outside of Metro, other jurisdictions. But you asked us, Steve, if there's any follow-up. And I have a half a dozen things that I know I'm not going to have time for that I would love to follow up on. So I do feel like you put me between a rock and a hard place, and I'm not choosing my favorite child or my favorite pet. I'm just curious. So if I could go back to a couple of comments, just to tease it out a little bit more. There's probably half a dozen comments that I heard that I would consolidate into maybe 2 or 3 topics. So not picking on any one person, but more of the topic that I really want to hear more about. So we heard about, we like these safe harbors, we don't like these safe harbors. A 20% safe harbor was supported by many, maybe not supported by a few. That 20% safe harbor is with land use efficiency measures. But Heather, I thought I would go to you because I heard you say something along the lines of, if we could have more optional safe harbors, we not necessarily looking for rebuttable presumptions, but I'm wondering, of the topics we've talked about with this group over 29 meetings, are there some safe harbors you wish we would have created? Are there some existing safe harbors that you'd like to tweak or change a bit? Could you help us out there?
Yeah. So let's see. Particularly on some of the items that were in the agenda that were pointed out. So in Division 8, 100, 8 kind of says it's a safe harbor, but as we talked about, it's a safe harbor, but you have to use it, and if you don't, then you have to do 9. And so I think making both of those optional, again, maybe those are each a safe harbor, and make it, but again, an optional safe harbor. If it's required, which is kind of essentially what happens under 9, it's like you have to do 9, but you can do 8, right? And so I'm looking for those optional, looking for safe harbors to be truly optional. I know we couldn't get there on all of the categories of partially vacant for large cities. Really wanted to get there because at least for a city our size, it's a lot of land. It's a lot of land, and trying to deal with partially vacant capacity analysis for low density residential, medium and high. They're very different. So I was kind of hoping we could get there on that. And then some of the other areas, as you alluded to, with the rebuttable presumptions are not in necessarily the cow tax area, but they will impact the cow tax rules with relation to, you know, capacity analysis based on the safe harbor housing mix, which is a rebuttable presumption, those kinds of things. So just a couple examples.
That's helpful. Any other thoughts around the existing safe harbors that are proposed, the draft safe harbors, things you would tweak to make them better? Or, hey, you totally missed many months of dialogue around why do we not have a safe harbor for X? Could we have a safe harbor for X or Y? Any other thoughts on safe harbors?
Anybody else? Go ahead, Brock.
Yeah, there's problems with the thresholds, I think, almost across the board. For the land market supply factor safe harbor, 10% just for partially vacant. That is too low. You pulled this from Washington where they allow up to 50 for each, right? The 4 times, I think that's too high with cost to serve. The 20% land use efficiency measures to get that safe harbor. Again, just not achievable for most places. There's a lot of issues around numeric thresholds in these rules, and not necessarily even just as it applies to safe harbors, but even broader.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'll just say seconded on Brock's points.
Okay.
It's a challenge for a lot of our jurisdictions. Safe harbors are wonderful if they line up with kind of market realities and things like that, and they're less helpful if they continue to present challenges.
Okay. Karen, other questions, or are we getting towards wrap up time? Oh, Martha, go ahead.
Oh, this is sort of a safe harbor, sort of not. And I know that DLCD staff know I feel this way. When it's, oh gosh, I'll try to find the citation. It's this idea that you can discount capacity of certain lands. It's under Division 24, 0067. These should be indented to make it easier to figure out what the heck you're looking at. Number 6.
Martha, we did advocate for that with the Secretary of State.
Okay.
It's a much larger enterprise, but we advocated for indentation.
Oh, awesome. It's really hard to read. I like the idea of being able to discount capacity for sort of smaller parcelized lots, but it has gone from a may to a shall, which, I mean, I guess I would rather see that as a safe harbor, as opposed to something that a jurisdiction has to do. Or it even could be, you can do up to X%, or something that gives a little more flexibility, because there may be situations in which it's not really necessary to discount, or maybe the discount isn't 50%, maybe it's 20% or something. And I understand we're trying to provide more certainty. I get that, I really do, but I feel like this could lead to larger, well, this is about the study area, I think, but in discounting that, it definitely could lead to a larger amount of land being brought into an urban growth boundary.
Before we go back to you, Brock, I just want to see if because we're getting close to the end, see if anybody else has comments about safe harbors in response to Cuttin's question. All right, Brock, seeing no hands, go ahead.
Yeah, just to flag that I think there's a Scrivener's error in Division 21, Rule 30, subsection 5. Excluded and included should be switched. I think that's.
Thank you.
We caught that one. I don't even know if I have time. I'm going to try it, Steve. Do I have time for one more?
Let's do one more. Yeah.
Very briefly. Like I said, I'm not picking my favorites. I'm just very serious about this. So we heard from Derek, there's a lot of support for UGB swaps and some of the amendments made. And then we heard from Metro from Ted that, that adds some new complexity for the Metro region. So I'm curious, maybe Ted, if you could start with, and I know we've gone back and forth on this a little bit, but if you could, for the group, say, here's the complexities and how buildable land versus urbanizable land in Metro's UGB and our concerns with, we were okay with swapping buildable land, but we're uncomfortable the way that rules are written to swap urbanizable land. And then Derek, I know you had a couple clarifying questions if we have time for that as well. I wonder if we could dig into that just a little bit.
I can try to be quick. I'm not sure what urbanizable means is one issue, and I don't know if it applies to land coming in, going out, or both. Some of the rules that talk about applying the same designation to land coming in as what's going out don't really work in our region, because the lands we're most likely to look at for removal from the urban growth boundary have their rural zoning still. So it doesn't make a lot of sense there. And then things like same or higher housing density. I don't know what to make of that in light of the shift towards removing constrained lands. Density is defined as units per buildable acre, but if we're not talking about buildable acres, then I don't know how to make sense of that anymore, that density issue. I think you can have a rule about within 10% of the capacity removed, or an expectation of same or higher density, but not both, because you run into some circumstances where you would have to increase, you would have to exceed that 10% to increase the density. That sounds a little bit probably confusing as I'm rattling it off, but I ran through some scenarios where you basically wouldn't be able to increase the density without running afoul of that 10% issue.
Thank you, Ted. Derek.
Yeah, just a couple things again with respect to the UGB adjustments. I'd mentioned in an earlier conversation one of the thoughts I had, and it has to do with why not provide local governments the same kind of flexibility that Metro's provided in the language here. I'm thinking of property in our jurisdiction that is substantially residential but has some industrial. If the property were swapped out, both the residential and industrial components would go out. The industrial exists because of its proximity to our wastewater treatment plant. If we have the capacity to swap it out and not, put ourselves underwater with respect to our industrial or commercial land need, what's the problem with that? I mean, if we're trying to bring in land, particularly address housing crisis, why not give local governments the flexibility to swap out whatever combination of acreage makes sense, as long as we're still working within our inventoried capacities. So that was one piece. The other I noticed was that The existing language, I think it's under sub 3. This is local government. This is considering an exchange. It used to say considering exchange of land may rely on land need analysis that, your previous land needs analysis without having to do a new one. Now it says local government's considering an exchange of residential land. Why was that term added? Why was it necessary to add residential in that language, I guess is my question.
It's a good clarifying question. If I could just real quick, maybe I'll start with your first point about, swapping out a combination of acreage and where that, I'm going to have to go back. That's going to take a little bit more thought. And I probably only have a couple more weeks where we can talk to you all about the rules before public comment periods close. So expect to follow up on that one. Likewise, Ted, I hear you. I feel like there's a definition of urbanizable land that pertains to Metro. Help me out, DLC staff, but we might need to go back to you, Ted. I think you mentioned that you ran through a couple scenarios for your local context. It might be helpful for us to run through them with you, or if you could share some of those scenarios. But clarifying question, this is similar to Maddie's context, that it's been a long time since we talked about this and lots of water goes under the bridge. But the reason why the word residential was added is because the way this was written, UGB adjustments, it was written to swap out land, whether it was employment land or residential.
Right.
And because we wanted to add more options for residential, and we have no statutory direction to work on UGB exchanges for employment land, what we did is we separated it. So we had to add the word residential because now paragraph 3 is specific to residential swaps. And now paragraph 4 is specific to all other swaps that are non-residential. So your employment land or your open space or parks or industrial land. And so you'll see that 4 now says non-residential land if you're swapping that or adjusting for that, versus 3 is specific to residential land. So that we had to add that to separate them. It used to be, here's how you do a swap, whether it's employment or. And it had some specific provisions just for employment. If you look at the old rule, there were certain specific provisions and we just separated those out to its own paragraph in 4. Hopefully that clarifies. But yes, I hear your point. There's a request for additional flexibility there, Derek, and I think
it's really specifically under 3A and or large A and 3.
Yeah, I'll have to think about that. There's not a lot of precedence for that. And I just want to make sure that, when you push that domino, there aren't other dominoes that come down with it. And which ones are those? What's connected to that? So let me double check on that and we'll get back to you. All right, I did it.
Right.
Did I get it all in time, Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, everyone. I think we're gonna, Conan, are you gonna lead us through a kind of a review of the kind of adoption process and what happens to comments from here going forward and future communications with this group?
What we do here. So I mentioned we still get to talk to you all. Send us stuff. Let's chat. If there's something we need to follow up on, expect a communication for us in the next couple weeks. So we're through November 7th. We can continue to chat about this, continue to send us public comments that you'd like us to consider. Folks that have those long lists, we've looked at the long list and we're working through those lists of items that have come in. Folks that have general comments of, I want the forest more than the trees or the weeds. Right now, we're really looking at, well, this rule does this, and I wish it did that, or this division does not have a rule for, and this division should have a rule for X, Y, Z, whatever that may be. So that is far more useful at this stage than, hey, the statute required some additional analysis. We just don't like that analysis in general is burdensome. That's just not going to be super helpful at this point. But welcoming and thankful and grateful for all those comments through the 7th. Thursday this week, we have our LCDC public hearing. So that starts at 1 o'clock. It is a 4-hour hearing. So from 1 to 5, tune in at any time. Check out the highlights in the recording. We do meet with our Rules Advisory Committee one more time. So at the end of the month, October 29th, That's a Wednesday, I believe, 9 a.m. You can tune into that or check out the recording. And then we have our final LCDC adoption. I don't think we have a date. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but we will have an LCDC adoption meeting either on December 4th or 5th. And I don't know what time, so I don't believe I have a time certain yet. That's December 4th. All right, wonderful. We know that. Other than that, I just want to say it has been immensely valuable. It has been such an honor to work with I think Alyssa said it, but just a really impressive group of folks with really big hearts, folks who care very, very passionately about development in Oregon, specifically housing and who's getting housed, what that looks like. So I have learned a ton along the way. I hope each of you have taken learnings and lessons through this. And to Beth's point, if you're really having a robust land use system, you're not visiting any one goal or any set of processes once every 30 or 40 years. Hopefully we get to revisit this with more frequency. We can iterate and keep the rules contemporary and relevant to the situation in our current landscape. So, Steve, any closing words from you? Did I miss anything? I usually miss something. I don't know.
No, I think you touched it all, and I gave my appreciation at the beginning. I wanted to let you and your colleagues share your appreciation at the end. So thanks everyone again, and encourage you to, I know you will, stay involved, reach out to the DLCD team and help make these rules the best they can be over the next couple months. Thanks again.
Thank you.